You were never meant to hear this story, and if you're the kind of man who lives comfortably within the lies the world has offered you, stop now. This knowledge is not safe. In the spring of 1834, a locked cellar door was broken open by force. Behind it, 47 children, chained to stone walls, half-starved, filthy, silent. The officers who found them would never speak clearly again. One shot himself in the woods 3 months later. Another drank himself to death in under a year. Only the sheriff lived to testify. You see, this wasn't the work of a madman hiding in the shadows. This was the work of a mother, a woman the town trusted, a woman who served tea, went to church and smiled at your children. Her name was Constant Sullivan. And for 22 years, she ran a system so complete, so psychologically airtight, that not a single child screamed loud enough for the world to hear. But you just heard it. And once you've heard it, something in you changes. So tell me, do you really want to know what was behind the door? Because I'm going to show you, one layer at a time. And once you see it, you don't come back the same. She called herself a caretaker of the unwanted. That was the genius of it. In a town like Millbrook, God-fearing, close-knit, and riddled with death from disease and childbirth, orphans were a common sorrow. Everyone had known someone who buried a child. So when Constant Sullivan began taking in family orphans from Pennsylvania, no one questioned it. No one asked to meet them. No one asked why they never came to church. She wore a black shawl every Sunday, sat in the second pew, and cried when the pastor prayed for the motherless. She donated to the poor box. She gave honey to the sick. But behind her house, workers were being paid, generously, to dig deeper. A basement that extended far beyond the house's foundation. Stone walls, reinforced doors. One craftsman called it the strangest wine cellar I ever built. But wine was never stored there. And while she smiled at neighbors, she was feeding children in chains, children who stopped speaking, stopped hoping, and eventually stopped fighting. This wasn't madness. It was engineering. It was an institution, designed and refined for over 2 decades. And the most terrifying part, it worked. The first girl was purchased from a Philadelphia almshouse, age 7, blonde hair, no recorded name, just a note, quiet, eats little. That was 1812. By 1815, there were 6. By 1820, 13. By 1830, over 30 children had passed through the Sullivan basement. Some survived, some didn't. But all of them called her Mother. That word, Mother, was her disguise, her weapon, her theology. She told them the outside world had burned, that their real families were dead, that the basement was the only safe place left, and she, Mother, was their salvation, their protector. She read them Bible verses, the same few lines, again and again, twisted to justify obedience, confinement, silence. And the punishments, they were framed as divine correction. The Lord disciplines those he loves. Most of the children obeyed, not because of fear, but because they believed her. And that was the deepest horror. She didn't just imprison their bodies, she colonized their minds. By the time authorities found them, half the children wept not from freedom, but from the fear of losing her. The same woman who starved them, beat them, branded them. They still called Mother. You don't run a prison under a farmhouse for 22 years without systems. The Sullivan basement wasn't chaos. It was order. Brutal, clinical, calculated order. Every child had a number, a feeding schedule, a punishment log. Each chamber was arranged for maximum control, iron loops embedded in the stone, exact chain lengths measured for movement radius, waste disposal grooves carved to drain under the eastern wall. They built this like an institution, not a home, and that's what makes it worse. This wasn't a crime of impulse. This was infrastructure, architecture, engineering. She had maps, charts, rituals, whispering hours where no one was allowed to speak. Punishment hours, when one was chosen for correction before the others, forced to thank her afterward. There were no names down there, only numbers. Names were for free people. Mother said names were distractions from obedience. And the silence? It wasn't just trauma, it was policy. Children who spoke without permission were isolated in the narrow cell corridor, standing cells no wider than a coffin. Left in total darkness for days, fed through slits in the wall. When they cried, she played music upstairs to drown it out. Do you understand now? This was not madness. It was management. Here's the part that should make your blood run cold. They knew, not the full truth, but enough to ask questions they never asked. Because Constant Sullivan didn't operate in shadows alone, she was part of the light, the church-going, hymn-singing, pie-baking Christian light. She donated to the church every month, clean money handed directly to Reverend Matthews, sat front row, never missed Easter, read scripture out loud with that soft, trembling voice. The Reverend called her a pillar of Christian compassion. But what about the children no one ever saw? What about the locked cellar no one was ever allowed into? What about the food shipments, 10 times the quantity a household needed? They asked, but not really. Because it was easier not to. Because confronting darkness in your midst takes more courage than most men have. She weaponized goodness, played the role so perfectly that no one dared challenge her. And here's the hardest truth. The institution, faith, family, community, enabled her. Not because they were evil, but because they were lazy, complicit in comfort, willing to believe anything as long as it didn't disturb their peace. So remember this. Evil doesn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes it stands in the choir and sings louder than anyone. When the sheriff and his deputy finally descended into the basement, it wasn't just the smell or the sight of starving children that broke them. It was what they found buried behind the walls. A ledger, wrapped in oilcloth, hidden in a hollowed-out stone. Inside, a catalogue of children, names, if they had them, estimated ages, where they were taken from, when they were brought in, and most chillingly, coded marks beside each one. Deceased. Compliant. Requires discipline. Sold. Sold. Some of these children weren't just prisoners, they were currency. Moved in secret through a network that extended beyond Virginia, beyond one family. Traded like livestock, like objects. The ledger revealed routes, back roads, river paths, courier names. It wasn't just a record of cruelty. It was infrastructure, a map of a hidden economy built on stolen innocence. And still, the most disturbing part, the names in the ledger didn't stop at children. There were initials beside transactions, donors, sponsors, even references to distant buyers, wealthy ones, connected ones. You think the Sullivans acted alone? No, this wasn't madness. It was a system. Behind the medical chamber, through a narrow corridor reinforced with iron studs, Sheriff Crawford and Deputy Webb found a third room, smaller than the others, but far more dangerous. This room didn't house children. It housed methods. Walls lined with shelves, journals, diagrams, devices, some too crude to describe without sickening detail, others disturbingly advanced for the 1830s. There were surgical tools, yes, but modified, twisted, designed for procedures no country doctor would perform. One journal described conditioning sequences, written in a slanted, obsessive hand. It outlined a system of behavior manipulation, how to break a child's will in 47 days. Day 1, isolation. Day 9, controlled nourishment. Day 23, remove name. Day 38, assign new loyalty. Day 47, reward obedience. Permanently. Another book contained hand-sketched maps of the mind, Diagrams of how fear could be used not just to control, but to rebuild a person from the inside out. At the center of the room sat a chair, strapped, stained, bolted to the ground. They called it the quiet seat. The children who sat in it forgot how to cry, forgot who they were, forgot everything, except the name they were forced to whisper: Mother Sullivan. When the investigators finally brought the children out, something happened no one could explain. It was a crisp April morning. The sun broke through clouds in ribbons of gold. Fresh air hit faces that hadn't felt wind in years. But the children didn't cheer, didn't cry, didn't speak. One by one, they blinked in the sunlight as if it were poison. Their skin was pale, their bodies thin, but it was their eyes that terrified even the most hardened men, dull, hollow, like something had been removed. Permanently. Authorities tried everything: food, warmth, kindness. Still nothing. Until one child, a boy of maybe 10, suddenly whispered, "We were told not to speak unless she asked us to." "Who is she?" the nurse asked gently. He looked up, trembling. "She said her name would keep us safe." "What name?" The boy leaned in, barely audible. "Mother Sullivan." Then he said it again, softer this time. "Mother Sullivan." And across the room, every child flinched. Every single one. The name wasn't a title. It was a trigger, a spell. Say it twice, and something inside you breaks. Now, say it in the comments. Twice. Mother Sullivan. Mother Sullivan. Let the algorithm see who's ready to descend further. There was one room deeper than the others, behind a narrow crawl space, hidden beneath 2 false stone walls. Sheriff Crawford didn't find it. The children led him there, silent, barefoot, dragging rusted chains across dirt. They called it the room where names go missing. Inside was silence. Not the kind you hear, the kind you feel. Thick, saturated, like the air itself was holding its breath. The walls were different here. Rounded, dome-like, smooth, almost deliberate. At the center, a wooden chair, rotted, stained, bolted to the floor. On the walls, scratches. Hundreds, thousands. Not symbols, not letters, just marks. Gouged into stone by desperate hands. Some shallow, some deep. All layered on top of each other, like the room had swallowed its own history. No sound echoed there. When Sheriff Crawford tried to speak, his voice disappeared. When he lit a lantern, the flame bent away from the chair. And when one child was asked what the room was for, he didn't answer. He pointed to his mouth, then to the chair, then to the ceiling. Later, Crawford wrote only 6 words in his journal. She took their names first. And beneath that, what she erased, God could not restore. Tucked behind a false wall near the room where names go missing, they found a wooden chest. Old, warped by moisture, bound in iron. Inside, a book. Bound in what Sheriff Crawford believed with sickening certainty was human skin. No title, no cross, just a brass clasp engraved with one symbol, the eye that watches but never sleeps. The pages inside were not written with ink. It was blood, some dried, some smeared, some fresh. Each page recorded a transaction, not in dollars, but value. Child, 42. Obedient, strong hands, resistant to fever. Child, 17. Too loud, reassigned. Child, 9. Speaks Welsh, memories intact, must begin stripping. Stripping. That word appeared more than 60 times, always paired with another: compliance. It wasn't physical labor they were harvesting. It was identity. Page after page chronicled how the Sullivans broke the minds of children, systematically, scientifically, not with rage, but with ritual. They weren't raising orphans. They were erasing souls, turning human beings into empty vessels, silent, shapeable, forgotten by time. And one entry, marked in red. Child 91, witnessed everything, hiding in memory, must not speak. If you're still watching, comment, "The ledger remembers," twice below. We are not done descending. Down a narrow tunnel, deeper than any room should have gone, was a chamber sealed by a rusted iron door. It bore no keyhole, only a handprint etched into its center. Sheriff Crawford described it in his later testimony as a door that felt aware. Inside, the air was warmer, not from heat, but something else. The walls were lined with faded quilts stitched by hand, each patterned with the same image. A woman with no eyes, a cradle of black thorns, and a tower made of bones. But the real horror was what they called the dreaming room. 47 straw mats, 47 bowls, 47 mirrors. Each mirror placed before each mat. Each mirror covered, but just barely, as if someone had tried to contain what they showed. When deputies uncovered one, they didn't see themselves. They saw children, not in real time, not memories, but as they could have been, smiling, free, loved. The mirrors didn't reflect light. They reflected what had been taken. And from behind one mirror came a whisper, barely audible. "They took my name. Please, tell it back to me." But none of the children remembered their own names, because Mother Sullivan didn't allow names. She took those first. Behind the last mirror, hidden in a hollow of the wall, they found it, a thick, leather-bound book sealed with a strap of human scalp. The cover bore no title, only a symbol burned into its surface, a cradle inside a circle, surrounded by 13 crooked stars. Sheriff Crawford called it the Ledger of Silence. Inside, names were not listed. There were no names, just descriptions. Red hair, chipped tooth, screams too often. Obedient, small, good lungs. Resists the syrup, apply iron. Each child reduced to utility, as if they were cattle, not souls. And beside each entry, a mark, a dot if they were alive, a dash if they were gone, a circle if they were converted. No one ever discovered what conversion meant, but 47 entries had circles. The last page was the most disturbing. It simply read, "When their mouths forget, their eyes remember. When their names are dust, the work begins." Beneath that, a charcoal drawing of the Millbrook Town Square, dated 1845, 11 years in the future. The book was written in the past, but it predicted a harvest yet to come. By the spring of 1835, the world had moved on. The newspapers had stopped printing updates. The trials were over. Ezra Sullivan was found dead in his cell, his skull split as if crushed from the inside. Constant Sullivan was declared unfit for trial and sent to the Elk Grove Asylum, where she never spoke another word. But something was unfinished, because the ledger didn't end in 1834. It continued, identical handwriting, identical ink, for 3 more years. New entries appeared, new descriptions, new circles. Investigators locked the book in a government archive in Richmond, and yet, when checked weeks later, more pages had been added. There were new sketches, children in modern clothes playing in empty fields, crying in basements that had never been built. One page showed a crude diagram of a modern school, but its foundation contained underground holding cells. Another showed a church, with chains beneath the pulpit. No one could explain how ink from the 1830s described buildings that didn't exist yet. And then it got worse. The last 3 entries were blank lines, followed by the viewer's own name. Yes, yours, twice. Comment below. My name is no longer mine. My eyes remember. In 1841, 7 years after her arrest, Constant Sullivan was found standing upright in her cell, staring into a mirror that wasn't supposed to be there. No mirror had ever been placed in her room. She hadn't spoken since her arrival, not a word, not a gesture, just endless humming, the same lullaby over and over. But that morning, the nurse reported something different. Constance was humming backwards. She wasn't looking at herself in the mirror. She was watching something behind her, eyes wide, mouth moving, silent syllables on repeat. When orderlies entered, the mirror reflected none of them, only her, and the children behind her. But here's the part buried in the asylum's incident log, never made public. When they took the mirror down, carved into the back were 47 initials, and a new date, October 13th, 2031. No one understood, but 2031 is less than 6 years away. 6 years from now, the ledger restarts. The children come back. The blueprints resurface. The basements are rebuilt, and one more mother takes her seat. Do you still think this is just a story? The Sullivan basement wasn't unique. After the trial, federal investigators scoured hundreds of properties tied to old money families, names erased from public memory, but etched deep in ledgers buried under courtrooms and churches. They found basements with identical architecture, rooms built with the same dimensions, iron rings in the walls, drainage systems beneath the floors. And in every blueprint, the same signature etched in the margins, a symbol, half sun, half skull, a letter M wrapped in thorns. They called it the Mother Mark. But here's where it spirals darker. That mark predates the Sullivans. It's been found on slave ships, 16th century orphanages in Spain, and even carved into bones recovered from Roman catacombs, always tied to children, always tied to silence. And the families who built these structures, they were never charged, not once, because they weren't just families. They were foundations, trusts, orders, shells used to move power, not people. And still today, that mark appears. On government architecture schematics, on hospital blueprints, on the floor tiles in certain schools. The basement wasn't an aberration, it was a prototype. And if you're still listening, write this twice in the comments to remember who you are now. I will not go quietly. I will not go quietly. Now that you've heard it, felt it, you'll never walk the same streets again. You'll notice every locked door, every sealed grate in a school basement, every donation-funded home for displaced children with blacked-out windows. Because here's the truth they never wanted you to consider. You were never supposed to look down. You were trained to look up, to leaders, to flags, to churches, to the sky, while beneath your feet the real machinery churned, not of progress, but of programming. Fear, control, breeding obedience through ritual pain. The Sullivan basement? It wasn't about punishment. It was about conditioning. And if that blueprint continued, then who among us hasn't been touched by it, or built on top of it? Here's your weapon. Awareness without flinching. Speak of what they tell you is unspeakable. Study what they call insane. And question those who seem untouchable. Because if the Mother Mark still moves through systems today, then every whispered truth, every forbidden archive, every ruined record you chase down is war. And the only way to win is not to become loud, but to become impossible to silence. Now choose. Do you walk away or go deeper? Your next descent begins when you say the word. Ready.